So Anand,
let's take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Ashok Soota, declared as one of the 12 gems of India. So please give him a warm welcome. So we will spend the next 15 minutes going through some of the questions that I've prepared, trying to understand his entrepreneurial journey. And then we will open the floor for questions you might have that you want to ask him directly and get his answers. So we'll start with the most interesting one. And I would try and speak for the entrepreneurial community here. So that's what my job is expected to be here. Okay. Most of them start companies because they fought with their bosses or they go out to make more wealth, or some of them say they're going to do a social impact or a service. What is your story, sir?
Sure. Well, Anand, thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm going to take a break before I answer your question to just get a feel on the profile of this audience, just to find out how many of you are already entrepreneurs, and include in that somebody who's really planning to become an entrepreneur in the near future. So could I just get an approximate show of hands on, it's a very high proportion, so that's very good. And the second thing I do want to ask is, how many of you who are entrepreneurs have bootstrapped your operations versus somebody who's actually raised external money? And for that, I'd put in a criteria of close to at least $700,000 and upwards. Because if you did a friends and family type of gathering, I'd put that into almost like bootstrapping. So who's actually bootstrapped? Maybe just get a show of hands on that. Again, a very large proportion. So there are a fairly high proportion of entrepreneurs, and there are a very high proportion of bootstrapped entrepreneurs. So, with this, let me just take on, it was important for me to have the context of our audience so that they kind of relate to some of the issues which I'm going to talk about, and which in a sense are also covered in this book, which I've co-authored with Mr. Gopalan, S.R. Gopalan, and Entrepreneurship Simplified, which is also up here. So you asked about motivation. I'll tell you here, there's a very interesting issue on what really comes first. Does your idea come first and then the desire to become an entrepreneur? Or does the deep burning desire to, say, get into entrepreneurship, and then you search around for the idea? And both can work. In my particular case, I think I have, maybe about 20 years ago, I was on a remote island where I did a wonderful set of spiritual exercises in a book called Wellsprings. And one of the questions asked in that book is, what are your unfulfilled desires? And I had two. One was to be an entrepreneur, so it was very clearly ingrained that I must become. And the second one was to write a book. Incidentally, I fulfilled the first one 16 years ago, but I've just about managed to fulfill the second one.
Okay. And one of the things that are constantly spoken about in this, I'm sure in this audience today, the kind of entrepreneurs here are all primarily product companies and companies which are trying to make a slightly different kind of startup, unlike the ones that I've seen some time back. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, why a service company second time around?
Well, again, I'm going to quote to you from the book once more, and I keep on drawing on it because it's not why I did this, but what are the learnings in this for this vast group of entrepreneurs? And I've stated in this that sometimes the young don't know what they don't know, and therefore they go out and change the world, and you have the Googles and the Microsofts and many of the others who are as very young entrepreneurs starting. When you have a lot of experience, odds are you're going to want to build on that experience. And therefore it's not unlikely that you will choose something in which you have a lot of experience, but the key to that, and that's the commonality in both, is that irrespective of whether you took a product or you took a service, they've got to be very clear-cut differentiators. And once you have those differentiators, what is it that distinguishes your business from somebody else's? I think then you're on the path to success. So that's really the key. So if I did, for example, Mindtree, we didn't compete against the Indian IT services companies. We competed against Cyient, Viant, and all the .com system integrators. Then the .com bust came and the world changed. But we got a wonderful start because of that. And here we began as a digital transformation company. So clearly some differentiators which came up to help us get kick-started. I want to add another thing, and you talked about product and services. I think there's a wonderful other development taking place, and that is that today the distinction between many of these is disappearing. With the cloud, with mobility, you've got software delivered as a service, and all of us are developing platforms all the time. We're developing IP all the time. I wouldn't be surprised if our IP-related sales or our platform-related sales is significantly higher than the total sales of many of the young startups here. So that distinction is also disappearing.
That's true. Okay. So you mentioned about idea being. So what do you think is the importance of the timing of the idea?
Yeah, well, timing, if you ask me, is key to the success in any venture. And it's not just the idea. In fact, it's a recurring theme in the book that you've got to choose your right timing for various types of entries, if you will. It doesn't say that you should not launch your business at the time of a slowdown. In fact, some of the most successful businesses, and again, Microsoft comes to mind, were started in recessionary conditions. But where timing does enter is, if you're going out and seeking funds and the market is depressed, you'll get a lower valuation. The market is booming, like we did when we started Mindtree. I mean, everybody thought there was no end to the growth of the dot-com. Nobody anticipated that 8 months later you'll get a dot-com bust. So we were able to go out and command a tremendous valuation. So that's one aspect of timing. The other aspect of timing, if you ask me, is, are you too early to the market or too late? So that's again a very critical aspect. If you're too early, in my view, is even more dangerous than being too late for or late rather. Too is already makes it impossible to then enter. But you could be a fast follower, you could be coming in second, third, or even 10th and still make a success of it. When you come in too early for a market, you have to spend time in developing the market. You've got to spend money in developing that market and helping that market to grow. And at that stage, you may run out of funds by the time somebody else comes and sweeps the benefit of yours. Whereas when you come in a little later, you can actually come in and say, I'll do something far better, more differentiated, as a solution which addresses a particular customer pain point, and then you've got a far better chance of being successful. And again, to give you one more example, Google was not the first search engine, and neither did Apple produce the first smartphone. So if you look at some of these things, there is a merit to being an early entrant, but I don't think you need to be the first entrant.
Okay. And now coming to the point of funding, which you mentioned. So most of them, okay, they were hands-on bootstrapping, but even those who bootstrap with friends and families still have to raise funds, at least to do whatever they are. So this angel investment, from a discussion for point of view of trying to raise money. How do you know which angel is going to work for you?
Well, okay, there are two angles to your question. One is angel investment and whether that angel investor will work for you. I do want to address the first part, though it's not implicitly stated by you. But how is your given investor going to work for you? I think, to my mind, is a question of first understanding what they know about your space. Is it just that they're offering you money? And therefore, you do need what I'll call as intelligent money. You need somebody who understands your space, somebody who's going to be able to add value to you. You have a right to ask the investor, how many introductions do you think you're going to be able to give me? Do you have an ecosystem which I can leverage on? And I think all of that should come with money. Otherwise, you may as well have just gone and borrowed something from A, B, or C in a sense. As you said, typically your friends and family. One of the other things, and I do know that this may not be practical for everybody, but we actually say in our book, and I think that's one of the chapters which attracts a lot of attention, both funding as well as winning with VCs, as we call it, is that every investor you go to will want a certain percentage of your company. And if you go to him and get $250,000, he'll take 15% of your company. If you go and ask him for $500,000 also, he may settle for 15%. But the fact is you've given away 15% for a very niggardly sum. And now you've been a very successful young entrepreneur. You got recognized as being in the top 10 today in terms of startups. But look at the years of struggle you went through in creating a venture where you took a small amount of money, you went to an angel, And you may not, since I've told you this just now when we were chatting, I do believe that you gave away more money than you needed to have done, a higher percentage of the company than you needed to have done.
Anyway, so moving on, I think I can speak for most of them here. Most of the companies here are at pre-VC stage.
Yeah.
So we are either at angel or seed round. And we discuss this often. We've actually pitched to VCs, and sometimes VCs have come forward. There's always this, when is the right time for a VC? Are you taking them too early on?
Sure.
Or what do you think is the right time for this?
Sure. You know, this is a flip side of your other question of saying is on timing. So even a VC will look at a sector and say, is the sector growing? Is it expanding? Where's the market demand? How many other players in the market? And I think once you answer those issues then become the right time. And what happens also is there's always a phase of what is the flavor of the season, even with VCs. So there'll be a period when a given market is going to be overvalued, it starts getting crowded, and then it gets undervalued. And those are the cycles where you go to try and catch the top end of that curve. And I think that applies not only to your first round, you go to look for it in each subsequent round that you raise. You've got to enter in when you can manage to get the peak of the valuations which are available. It applies even for those who are going to go public. You choose a time when markets are on the plus side so that you lower your own dilution for a given amount of money. But keeping in mind that you've also got to give a return to your subsequent shareholders.
So coming back to valuation, which you were just mentioning, it's in the experience of most of us here, where in India, there seems to be a notion of investors wanting more than what they need to chew, is from the entrepreneur's point of view. And in the end, the bargain is really an unhappy entrepreneur. So the balance is a very important thing between the investor and the entrepreneur. So how do you strike this? How do you push back?
You know, I'm not sure that this is an India-specific feeling that you have. And I actually believe that there's an element of we're okay and they're not okay in your statement. That means this guy's taken you for a ride and you've ended up giving him too much of the company for that. I think if you have a good understanding of the value that you're bringing in, what are your real true differentiators, your confidence about the market that you're addressing, what is the real addressable market out of that, what are your strategies to grow, how will you introduce a stream of new differentiators? If you get that story across, my belief is you can get a wonderful valuation. And I don't think it has got anything to do with Indian VCs versus elsewhere. So I think you can go out and get a good valuation today in India. There's really no reason why one should not be able to do so. But like everything else, it needs hard work. It needs, I think it needs a lot more planning before you start raising money. Then, and I'm not saying that you need to go through a prototype stage, etc. Of course, you may need to bring it up, but I've got a different theory on that. That if you put in whatever money you were going to put in bootstrapping, and tell the VC, okay, I'm taking maybe $1 million from you, I'm putting in $200,000, but I also get my share of equity in addition to sweat equity for the 200 I put in. So your money is already earning from the word go, rather than having spent it all and then going out to the market when you're running out of cash. So I think these are some of the approaches which we've outlined in our chapter on winning with VCs. Also the ability then to negotiate with them on the right terms. And I think you do need, and here I think you need help sometimes. Remember one thing, a VC's dealt with hundreds of players like ourselves. That's their business. We are going to do it maybe once, twice, thrice in our lives. And therefore it's very asymmetrical as a negotiation. And therefore it's better to get a good advisor on your side to help you negotiate.
I guess the entrepreneurs are more emotionally bent than the VCs who are more professionally bent.
Maybe yes and no, but I'm not sure. You know, I'll tell you where the emotion comes in. The emotion actually comes in the wrong thing. You're passionate about your product or your venture, but the emotion is, here I must get the money at all costs. And that is the worst way in which you should negotiate. If you've got your back to the wall, you're running out of money, you're never going to do a good negotiation. If you are saying, oh my God, I'm so grateful that this guy is giving me $500,000, and then you say, okay, now let me rush into the first deal, that is the wrong way to go about it.
But I guess the first-time entrepreneurs will always have to, difficult to put up that face, and especially when you're in value of death.
That is the point. See, that is exactly the issue. And I really do believe that you can avoid it. I mean, I think it's important if you do your planning, you think bigger. It's far better to think bigger, take a little time, get your story clear. Personally, I'm not saying it's going to be feasible for everybody. But if you could go straight to a VC and be able to say, okay, I'm not going to settle for less than $2 or $3 million, I think you don't have to stint and sacrifice in the way that many of you are doing. You end up creating and I've got some very good friends here who we've been talking to, and you, for that matter, I just look at the years of sacrifice that have gone in. And in the end, you've also got to remember, I think the journey is also going to be a joyous journey rather than one of tremendous amount of struggle, because you're saying, I'm really committed to this.
But I guess sometimes the measure of commitment is also what is the level of sacrifice you've done.
I'm not so sure if that's really necessary. You have a commitment doesn't mean that because of the commitment I'm going to sacrifice. A certain amount of sacrifice is necessary. Again, we state in the book that you will have to settle for a salary cut, because a startup can't afford your high salaries, assuming somebody's had a few years of experience. And also the VCs will frown at a very high salary. But that doesn't mean that you now need to wonder where your next month's expenses are going to be met, how you're going to meet your kids' education. I think you need to have a certain comfort level in order to keep mind, body, and soul together in terms of what you're planning to do.
Okay. Moving on now, I did read about the culture that you talked about. Mm-hmm. Now, culture and business, how much of a role it plays in scaling the business?
Yeah, of course, it's very fundamental. Again, one of the basic things about the book is saying that if you take care of certain fundamentals, and that's why we've called it as Entrepreneurship Simplified, those fundamentals are the same whether they're here or they're in any other part of the world. So if you've taken care of those fundamentals, and that includes creating the right organization, creating the right organization culture, and marketing, and so on and so forth, then the whole task of creating a company and being successful becomes much more probable. And talking on the importance of culture, again, a quote from Peter Drucker is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what that really means is that all your differentiators, nothing will last forever. They have a shelf life. The only differentiator that nobody else can replicate, which is unique to your own organization, is the culture.
Okay, so moving on to more, one of the general things before we open it to the floor. So this is something that we keep discussing because as product companies, we find it difficult when we engage in discussions with investors or ecosystem. The yardsticks, we believe, are slightly different because revenue comes a really long way off. The product takes a gestation period, and in some cases like healthcare, you will have to prove it to work. There is a stamping that comes from the industry, which is the doctors. So there's still only a handful in India. What do you think there is?
Of such product companies? I see there's a huge change. Just look at this audience here. This is not a handful. This is a room full already. And this is just one forum. And the beauty of it is that today, and you're talking of products, particularly when you look at the old days, manufacturing was a pain in India. I mean, I've spent 20 years in manufacturing. I know how much we struggled, and then how much easier it became when we went into software. But today, fortunately, manufacturing and hardware are really coming back altogether. The IoT is obviously playing a really remarkable part in it. I think you were mentioning to me, maybe Sundar, I think you told me, that there was a gentleman here who's producing 10 IoT devices almost every few months or something like that. So there's so much new applications which are feasible, where they get driven by being, in a sense, hardware embedded. So there's a huge boom going on that score. And I'm actually amazed, I've met more people who've got funded on manufacturing in the last 6 months than I did in the last 6 years. So that means there are people going around getting money in that space.
So let me ask you a question on the same context. So if you had 2 people approaching to you and asked you for money, we all know he has money. So they asked you for money, and one is a product company and another is a service company who's going to go quickly on revenue. Which one will you bet on?
Okay, so I won't, although you stated it in a question of what would I do, I think I should put myself in the shoes of a VC, okay?
No, we won't go the VC because the VC has a different play.
No, I'll tell you, that's important. One way or the other, he's an investor. I'm also coming in as a rational investor if I came in. And therefore, what is a rational investor going to look at? See, the VC or your external investor who's not friends and family is going to have a very clear-cut criteria. Their minimum expectation that by the time they get their own exit, at a bare minimum, I would say that I think if you don't get 5x, it's not been a success. So what is the probability of getting that revenue? There are a lot of VCs who will also be very much interested in the future. But again, they're going to look very cold, hard terms at how you're going to get this. There are also VCs who've got a fairly long horizon in terms of what is your investment period before they'll exit out. Now, we, for example, have always made it clear to our VCs that, look, we'll go public in 7 years. So they knew that they'll get their exit at that time. Because remember one thing, that external investor of yours needs an exit.
Okay, then concluding from there, the core IP building, hard to crack problems kind of companies, what is your take for some of the entrepreneurs here? Is that a path that is feasible from going through these journeys that you're talking about? Or something easier would be a better bet to start with?
No, I'm not so sure that, creating IPs is the best way of creating value. So I'd say in any business that you are, you've got to be able to generate and develop IPs. That's got to be a core, whether it's a services company or a product company. And, when you've been talking of VCs and what are they looking for, what they're really going to see is what is the intellectual property that you created? How is that helping you to create value in your business, which is significantly higher than just your revenue? So you get a much higher valuation for your company when they can see the IP content of your venture.
No, but that's somewhere contradicting the other part where you have to be a first-timer, you have to show absolute differentiator. When you're showing absolute differentiator, you're going to be a first-timer, which means your risks are going to go up. So the same investor is going to worry whether this is going to happen. So it's a...
Not necessarily. It's not so much of a chicken and egg. Firstly, I believe that you can even raise your money without having to show a proof of concept. If you are strong enough with your offering, you've been able to present it on paper well enough, and it includes both a marketing strategy, it includes an organizational strategy, all of that is incorporated in your business plan. You are convincing your investor of a certain valuation for your entity based on, say, a 7-year revenue. Now, it's all pie in the sky. He doesn't believe your numbers also. But what he is going to look at is what is the quality of the team you have, what is the quality of the idea, and remember that in the end, that a valuation is a negotiated number. So you got that number, he doesn't believe it, but it's also the opportunity for the investor to come in on the ground floor when the valuation is at its lowest. So you are not necessarily having to be defensive about it.
Okay, so now we'll open a few questions.
If we can just take 2 questions maybe, just to get a feel of.
No speech here, please. We'll give pointed question. Yeah, go ahead.
We can provide a service for Western easily rather than Indians.
I didn't get the question.
We can, as Indian companies, we can provide a service easily
Okay.
and rather than Indians. Means getting into any Indian company and providing a service with a big challenge. And you can provide a service, just it's not a very 1 or 2 interactions in investor. So what is the mantra of your success with the Indians?
Still not getting this. Are you saying is it easier to go global than it is to serve Indian customers? Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, what you're really saying is quite valid in only from one angle, I'd say. And that angle is that obviously prices are lower in India. And therefore and which is why the entire IT services industry in particular developed as a global industry, because we were meeting global needs at global prices. And we had much lower costs. Today the costs have got more or less equalized because everybody's made India a part of their story. And, but we've established our value in the meanwhile. And to that extent, yes, prices are low in India, but the cost of selling is lower in India. And the nice thing is that today the Indian consumer is also wanting state-of-the-art technology. So there's a huge learning experience in adding to your story.
Okay. In the
Thanks,
interest-
Ashok.
Yeah.
This is brilliant. So thank you so much, Anand and Ashok. So Anand, it'd be good if you can kind of do the honors. Yeah. And request Krishna to kind of hand it over to Anand.